called to order. Do we have any changes to the agenda that is in front of us? If not, then I will call for approval of the agenda.
Move to approve the agenda as presented, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. We'll move on to new business, which is the, basically discussing, questions that came about last week at the Board of Supervisors meeting. I do wanna take a couple minutes to say it's unfortunate that we're even here right now, in May without an approved budget. So, I hope that, we're able to answer some questions, and Mr. Monk, you can pass these on to, the supervisors, to, hopefully get an approved budget on Wednesday. So Mrs. Karen, would you like to move forward with, a position allocation?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Hester. Can, before we get started, I want to make sure Dr. Sabine can hear me, because I know all of you can. Will you ask him if he can hear me, Steve?
Yes, I can hear you, but it's faint.
Yeah, I think the mics need to be turned up. See, you try to quiet me.
That was
Steve,
planned,
it's
Dr.
not gonna work.
Sabine, we'll accommodate that. We really wanted to turn the mic completely off.
It was almost all the way down, okay?
At least you're back up there, though.
Yeah, I did get my spot back up there. Thank you, Mr. Edwards. So here's what we're gonna talk about today. We're gonna review, some board member questions. We're going to distribute the Board of Supervisors questions that I think came from Mr. McCarthy. I think that was maybe in your Friday packet, but we want to make sure you had them again today. We're going to review ESSER 3, since there's a lot of talk about that in the last Board of Supervisors meeting, so that you all know what really occurred. So we need to have our own narrative of what really happened versus what someone else tried to think happened. We're also going to clarify the administrative salaries as opposed to special education teachers. There was a comment made at the Board of Supervisors about that, so we need clarity there. And then we're going to talk about the health insurance premiums, the employee portion that we've been talking about, that at this time we would come back and discuss with you about whether or not we need to pass that on or absorb it ourselves. So with that being said, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Wright-Holm, and she's going to take the two questions that Mr. Monk has asked at other meetings so that we can go ahead and get those questions answered.
Thank you. Members of the committee, Dr. Sabine. We just did a quick chart here to show where we were at the beginning of the year, where we are now. So we used the 8/15 date, and subdivided it as we typically do with the licensed classified staff. And then we did a point in time, and we did it right around the time of that question, around April 25th. So you'll see that we had 20 licensed on 8/15, 39 classified, as opposed to now 34 licensed and 47 classified. We did add in that we had long-term subs also filling some roles, and we had split some of the licensed positions, 3 of them to be exact, into extra periods, which sometimes happens to cover needs. And then question 2 was where specifically the 29 budgeted positions would be placed. And we did put underneath there that it shows tentative assignments based on current enrollment and scheduling needs. So we did these placements, this is where we believe they will be, but we have to put the caveat on there that we will be looking at the new enrollment figures, and certainly as they do the master schedule at the secondary level, there could be some fluctuation.
Ms. Wright-Holm,
Yes.
please. If I may, just to step back just for a second. So the first question about vacancies, is that out of the norm? Is that excessive? What is that? 20 at the start of the year, 34 at the end for license?
So 20 at the start of the year isn't terribly excessive, you know, it definitely is higher because we know we're moving into the shortage. I didn't compare to prior years at the end of the year, but I would say it's higher than normal because we've had more teachers leave during this year than we might typically. But remember, this is just a point in time. So when we pick an April 25th date, we're not comparing that because we weren't looking at April 25th last year to be able to say for sure how's it compared. when we're looking at vacancies, one day we could fill 3 positions, one day we could get 3 resignations. So what we really try to do to a true comparison is to look at the full year period each year to really understand how many total resignations in job groups and how many hires. And that's the best way to really say, are we higher or lower, rather than trying to compare what may be more of an arbitrary time. But I would say, if you wanted my best thinking on that, I would say we're higher for a point in time at this point in the year with licensed staff being vacant.
And so hire, Dr. Angelo or Dr. Savine, I know it's situation to situation, as teacher is whatever the subject might be, but substitutes, we've been told all year long, are really at a premium. They're not like they were. So 34 positions, what are we doing?
Well, the ones that have long-term subs, we have long-term subs, and if we don't have long-term subs, we redistribute to kids and pay somebody to teach an extra period. Increase class sizes, I mean, that's, the kids are there, we obviously have to do something to make sure that there's a teacher in front of them. You heard a story at the Board of Supervisors meeting potentially last week. That's a good example of, you have to sacrifice sometimes certain classes that aren't necessary for graduation to ensure that you can offer classes that are necessary for graduation. So those things happen. I mean, they rearrange schedules. They have somebody teaching through the full day, and we pay them the extra period, and or we get a long-term sub, or we redistribute and increase class sizes. Those are basically the 3 options. There aren't really any other options available.
And safe to say this is happening in all of our schools.
Yeah. We have, just to give you an example, if a core subject English teacher leaves at a high school in the middle of the year, they may look at redistributing and splitting those into extra periods and have other teachers take on, which is very tiring for our teachers to take on extra periods. In some situations, we may have an aide who's finishing a degree program or teacher program or becomes eligible for a license. They may fill in as a substitute in that role until they're able to be licensed. So we approach this in a multi-pronged way to satisfy the needs of the students, and that can involve very different scenarios and in different positions in the school.
And in some cases, teachers teaching 7 periods without a break. I mean, that's just unfortunate.
Yeah. And of course, at the elementary level, that's not an option.
Yeah.
Right? So at the elementary level, we take the students, if we can't fill a position and we can't get a long-term sub, we take the students and we redistribute them across the grade level.
And we had several of those instances earlier this year.
Yeah. So we may go down from 4 teachers in a grade level to 3 teachers in a grade level, which obviously has the impact of increasing class sizes.
Some of the positions are those new counselor positions, so those were new this year based on the new requirements. So if they weren't filled, we didn't necessarily have to have a substitute, but it does mean that our current counselors are maintaining their same level that they had in the previous year. There may be a teacher that is not a classroom teacher that's not filled, and that might not bear the same burden as having a class. So if we have, say a math specialist that's vacant, they're not necessarily holding a class on their own, but we don't have that resource to push in and assist those students.
Can I touch on something, in the fact that when those students are distributed into other classes, it doesn't mean that now that teacher position is no longer needed. That teacher position is still needed, and it's still showing as vacant, and so that goes into our numbers also. So that's something I wanted to hit on is, even though teachers are stepping up, which I can't thank them enough, there's still a need across the board for that, in this instance, 4th elementary teachers.
And that might help, that might happen more at the elementary level than at the secondary level. But we have filled positions this year where maybe there wasn't even a long-term sub, but we've had a daily sub in there. Somebody relocates to the area, and honestly, we sort of luck out that a candidate comes along who's from another state, and we can put them in that role. So we'll continue to look for the person, and keep that posting up, in the hopes that we will, at the right time, be able to, obtain the right teacher.
Yes, sir?
Mr. Chair,
Mhm.
question, I appreciate this is very helpful, because as I think about some of our challenges, positions are challenges, but then also filling those positions are a challenge. I appreciate the work that your staff does to try to make that happen, in the environment that we have. The 34 and 47 for 81, is that, just to clarify, that's 21-22 school year?
Yes.
Okay,
So
so-
we are looking at, because I thought your question was really like, where are we right now? Because if I was quoting numbers for where we are next year, they would be higher.
You hit the nail on the head with what my question was, and I just wanted to clarify to make sure. Thank you.
Just one, and those are numbers just that the board has taken action on, so that would not be reflective of anything being presented to us tomorrow evening.
I would say so, because the 425 would have been prior to the last
The
board
last
meeting. Yeah,
So
Sorry,
we
I had to
presume
think
that right
about
now,
that.
this is probably higher right now,
yeah, could be.
after 20.
For next year. Unless there's something I'd love to do. Give her your one.
These numbers were pulled before our last closed session, so it would have included anybody.
I may have
who was
confused
on-
myself there, so if someone turned in a resignation, that doesn't necessarily mean a vacancy, though, because they would still be finishing out this school year sometimes.
It depends on what their resignation date would be,
Okay.
yes.
Thanks.
But you may have acted on it in a board session, because you got that.
Right.
Okay, all right, so question number 2, where would the 29 positions be placed? We'll start with high school, and you'll see that we've broken them out by each school and how many. And this is with input from our principals and their needs, and review by both assistant superintendents and a collective group. So you'll see we have 4 at Jameswood High School, 2 at Millbrook, and 3 at Sharando. That totals the 9. At the middle school, you'll see 3 at Admiral Byrd, and notice that there is a special education position posted. That is one of the 3 budgeted that was assigned to special ed. So one of those 3 special ed positions has been placed at Byrd. You'll see Dow J has a special ed. We used part of the middle school numbers, positions for that one. And then you'll see Frederick County has business, family consumer science split with James Wood and Arden Naylor. And then at the bottom, we have an ELL teacher. This is one of the 3 that are budgeted in the budget, separate from the 29. And that one we know will be placed at the middle school, but until we have the numbers of students in need and where they are, how that will be distributed will be determined at a later point. At the elementary school level, you'll see we have 1 position, K-5, added at those schools listed. Then you'll notice that there are 2 ELL teachers, and these are the remaining 2 of the 3. And those will be determined as well, because we have to look at the numbers of students with those needs. And then we have an additional to be determined, because we have several other schools at the elementary level. We're watching closely for class size and comparability. And as we get new enrollment numbers, we'll be taking a look at that. And just as a matter of point, we have already identified 4 positions that we're moving among the elementary schools. Because if there is ever a chance of taking a position out of one school, because they have good class sizes, we will use that resource. So we actually had more needs than what you see here. We're also repurposing and reassigning as necessary to meet those needs. And the final column is special education, and you'll know that we had 3 budgeted positions for that. One of those, we're putting a third. The other one will be a hearing impaired teacher because the case numbers are so high for what we currently have, we need a second. And the third one will be determined because again, special services has to look at the student cases and work through their process of deciding where those resources need to be. So I don't want you to think to be determined doesn't mean not needed. To be determined is needed. It's just really we're waiting to see how we're gonna assign those resources.
So that's IEP across the board in the summertime as registration comes forward. We hit this about 3 years ago, Dr. Lamanna, when maybe 2 years ago, when over the summer there was this like flood of IEP students transferring into the division, and there was this thing that went on, like how do we accommodate all of these? Do we have enough teachers in the right places? And so actually we don't know until what, midsummer?
Well,
until
we may
those
have
requirements
additional
off.
needs midsummer. I think the team will probably be able to identify before the end of this year, maybe in another 4 weeks, because they're working on it now, where we think that needs to be. So we will know there's a need and we will know where it is. We don't know it right now, but we will know it very soon. Will there be more students moving in this summer? Very, very likely.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Mr. Lake, to your point, I think I presented it in a subsequent budget development session, but we've looked at those numbers over those several years, and it can be as high as 30% of our families who are transitioning into us, students are eligible for special education services. So we anticipate that when families do transition to us, there will be a relatively high number of students transitioning in who will need special education services.
Mr. Ratholm, I just want to clarify, those to be determined positions specifically under elementary, I could be adding in the one for middle school, but I'm not sure about that one. But those are also based on the governor's budget and the state funding that's
The
coming
ELL
down, which is we're unsure of right now also.
That's really to meet the SOQ requirements, and our ELL population has grown, and then I did run the figures just so you can, over the last 5 years, on average of 9% a year, but between 20 and 21 it grew, looks like 15%. So there's a really strong growth in that area as well as special education. That's been a significant need of ours. So those positions are also really needed, and there'll be some scrutiny of where those students are and what the needs are at each one of the schools.
Can we, I don't mean to slow the meeting down, but I actually mean to slow the meeting down. I want to make sure we're clear on this stuff, given the events of the last week. So, we are required by state law, when a student has an IEP, we will meet that IEP.
Just to be clear, we're required by federal law.
Yeah.
It's been in place since 1975 to meet the needs of a student who has an IEP.
So we're here trying to anticipate what our current needs are as far as special education is concerned. And the summer transition period could throw another whole deal at us.
Typically does.
And we are then required to reshuffle or hire additional resources, or depending on what the IEP states, how big could it be a class of 4, could it be a class of 6, or whatever that is, given the need.
Or it could be a one-to-one, a paraprofessional, working one-to-one with a student, so.
That we
to
see
answer-
all the time. We
to
see
answer
that
your
all the
question-
time.
That's
Every
most
time I
of
go to an awards ceremony in Sharando, I see a one-on-one during that ceremony. We will see it at graduation in a couple of weeks. We will see one-on-one aides escorting someone who is graduating and not more than 10 feet from them the entire time. We see that. And so,
That's probably, I would say, the highest growth throughout the year of the need is a student is either newly identified or moves to this area, or there's a change to the IEP, and that one-on-one aid is added, and we
we have got to put a person in the role, and we have to have that position.
And if I can provide just further clarity, because we talk a lot about class sizes and we hear a lot of questions about class sizes. When it comes to students with disabilities who are served in a self-contained class, whether it's a learning center or what we call cross-categorical, it's students with learning disability, other health impairments, and things to that effect. Those class sizes are dictated by the federal law. So it's very complex. Students are assigned points based on their level of disability, and depending on the number of students with certain point values, I would say, a teacher can only have a certain number of points within that classroom. And so, if you walk into a classroom and you wonder why there are 6 kids in it, it's because that's what the federal law requires us to have. Or we're providing a class of 6 knowing that this teacher can have 8, and that allows for 2 students to come in if we have growth over the summer, if we have growth within the school year. So when we say to be determined, it's not that we have no idea where they are or that we don't have a need for it. It's that we could put this in one of any number of buildings, and until we complete the IEP process, the development of the IEP for every student by the end of the year typically is when that happens, although we could do some of it in the summer. And then we start looking at students move in. We don't know whether that teacher should go to this building, or this building, but I can tell you, if you talk to Dr. Sandy, she would say, we have more needs than we have positions. And so we're going to fill the highest needs we have. So I just want to be clear about that. When we talk about class sizes, that's not us making that determination. That is, the federal law dictates that very clearly to us.
The numbers that we were given a minute ago on start vacancies, whatever, start and whatever. Do we know how many are special ed?
I mean, I have a report here that would probably come.
Is that tomorrow night? If that's tomorrow night, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about that tomorrow night, but I can, if you wanna look at the 425 time, as this date of what we're looking at here, I can tell you fairly quickly how many of those are special education, if you would like to give me a second.
I guess, I think my real question is, are we currently meeting our requirement for special ed dictated by law?
I would say we're currently meeting the requirement. I would say we're also understaffed. So we have a lot of folks whose caseloads are larger, and that obviously is putting a strain on those folks. But we do the best that we can to make sure, and Dr. Sandy and Maria Niedrich are really brilliant and their staff to make sure that we're balancing all that and meeting those federal guidelines. And it truly is a balancing act, especially when we're understaffed. And I want to say at one point in time, Jennifer, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I thought we had 22 unfilled positions in special ed at one point this year, and that included licensing and classified staff.
So, looks like about 14, just doing a quick look. But it's always a significant number because that's really our most difficult position to fill, because there's so many needs and there's such a shortage of teachers, and there specifically is a shortage of special education teachers.
Is that licensed and classified or just our teachers? That's just the teacher.
I'm
So
sorry,
14
you just gave?
that is teachers
And I think
who have resigned, have letters that received. I'm just looking at their end date to make sure, because I know we were counting the current vacancies, but that's the people who, at the end of this year, we have as having given us a letter and resigning. A couple of them aren't leaving until the end of this. No, this is all people who have given a letter at this point in time, so.
You're saying 14.
Mr. Comstock, I'll just piggyback off of what you said. That's what is so infuriating to me when I hear the community say misinformation about our special education department, because every teacher, every aide, everybody is critical to those individuals. And I mean, you've heard me talk about it. My brother, I mean, it's just gotten worse not worse, but more cases over the years with, and the teacher shortage of special education's just gotten worse because it's so hard on individuals. And that's why it's so important for us to get the full funding so we can, work on our special education salary, and get them up to, par with our, competing districts. And that's just what's just so frustrating about this, because there's so much misinformation. If there's, one demographic, it's the special education demographic, and everyone is needed for the success of each and every one of those kids. So
We do have long-term subs in some of those positions, so that's something to be aware of, that they're not all just unfilled. We have, whether it's a retiree or somebody, we will put somebody in.
I'm actually, Mr. Chairman, I'm actually a little bit surprised at how small the number of new teachers, new positions, how small the number of special educators there are in there, given how often we hear about, not just from cabinet, but from, teachers. I stay in touch with a lot of teachers, and I have a lot of friends who are in special education, and hearing about their caseloads and hearing about the difficult time they're having providing the services that students need, and how many new students we get every year with IEPs that need more services. I would have expected that we would have an even greater need to have more special ed teachers. And I understand the salary initiative was one way of trying to help with that. And in an ideal world, we could do both, have that salary initiative and have all of the special ed teachers that we need to properly provide the services to our students that need them. That's definitely an area that is struggling, that's suffering right now. So.
any other question? Are you done, Mrs. Nardi? Any other questions in regards to the position allocation before we turn on Mrs. Camry's microphone and allow her to talk?
Well, I'll be honest, I thought it should be turned up more.
I guess we'll let you talk now.
Well, also the neighbors across the street would be able to hear me as I talk today.
Yes,
So-
thank you.
Next on the agenda are the questions that were submitted by Mr. McCarthy that he kind of spoke to at the last Board of Supervisors meeting. I'm not going to go into every question and answer, but I do want to have an opportunity to at least speak to them quickly. And that email is in your packet. You'll see here on page 8. So I'm just going to run through them kind of because I feel like that the story that was being told or the narrative that was given is not quite all-inclusive, I guess. That it's a broader spectrum that you guys will see as we go through this. So Mr. McCarthy, his first question was, there was approximately $7 million in expected capital expenditures in the upcoming budget that would have gone into Old Ayler for HVAC improvement, and those funds were earmarked to come from federal COVID. Well, that was true back early in the year. Remember when the application was due back in July, we had to get pre-approval from the state. Therefore, Ayler was, at that time, what we were looking at, because the committee was being formed to determine what Ayler would look like if it were set to be an academy. But since then, that has changed, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So yes, that was true at the beginning, but not so in the end. His second question was, now that the school board has agreed to surplus the old Ayler back to the county, those funds are no longer earmarked and can be used for other purposes. Well, I don't know, but you guys at the school board know that we never have funds that are not earmarked for something else. So if something doesn't come through for us, we have something in the backup. And that's where that comment of saying that it's no longer earmarked is not true, because we were always looking to go ahead and do that ARML if the Ayler did not come forward. So, but you'll see that in just a little bit as well. His third question, there are 3 HVACs related capital projects in the current budget, $350 for Val J, $350 NREP, $350 Pass Hoover, which would qualify for using the federal funds, a total of a little over $1 million. Well, again, we already had it earmarked for a backup plan if the Ayler fell through. And these were, we always take that into account. What our backups are, what we're looking at, what's in the queue kind of deal. Question 4 is, he said if those items were paid for from the now available federal funds, which are not available because we already have an earmark for ARML, then they could reduce the requested county funding needed for the 1.2 to approximately 233. Well, again, they were already earmarked, and to say that we could reduce the request, the 7.4 that's in the capital projects fund, you have to remember 5.2 of the capital projects fund were state dollars that are not solidified either. So we're still playing with or talking about numbers that aren't solidified. So that's the whole issue. So even if that list is 7.4, we're not looking at federal dollars going over there because we're working toward the ARML. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. Question 5 was, the federal funds then remaining would be approximately $6 million, which could be used for the other qualifying capital projects at other schools, or could be used for COVID bonuses for staff. Again, the application tells us what we went forward with, is what's in the application, and no time or bonuses in there as well. So that's, I think that's him trying to determine how he thinks we should spend the money, but I think you as a school board have already determined that. And lastly, I'm not sure why this question was asked, but can the school board give bonuses to administrators, not teachers? In other words, does the school board have the right to pick and choose who gets a bonus if the board determines to give bonuses? Well, that's true not only in COVID related, but also every day, any kind of funds in our budget, that you have the right to choose who gets and who does not. But again, the application drives everything on the ESSER 3, and never at one time did we look at bonuses in ESSER 3.
So, just to make the point, there is no, in that discussion, there is no such thing as COVID bonuses or salaries, because we never specified that at the beginning when asking for the funds.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about that, yes, Mr. Lake. The application that we put in can be adjusted. And if you were to come forward as a school board to say, hey, you know what, we're not gonna do AILR, hey, we're not gonna do ARML, we wanna do bonuses, then we would have to amend it to get that approval from the state in order to do so. So let's talk a little bit more about ESSER 3, because that's gonna be the hot topic, I think, on Wednesday. So we'll make sure everybody's clear. So here, I think the comment was made that Mr. McCarthy was saying, Mr. Ludwig, that they didn't realize the former AILR was going to be used with ESSER 3. So if you look on your pages 9 through 34, you have all the minutes where it was addressed, and we've also summarized it on this slide. But I'd like to go through that if I could. So on July 19, 2021, the Buildings and Grounds Committee, Mr. Bach reported possible repurposing of AILR, so there it was, and being able to use ESSER funds to do so. On August 26th, I reported on all the ESSER 3 funds, and we went down for a supplemental appropriation. Now your question probably is, if you went down for a supplemental appropriation in this year, then why is it in the budget for next year? Because it's not encumbered, because we haven't gone out to bid. So that means that appropriation would be lost in this year, so we have to have it in next year so that we can move on the project. November the 3rd, Buildings and Grounds, Mr. Bach reported on options to repurpose the old AILR. He reported the school division's application for ESSER 3 funds to make improvements in the school was approved at 7.3. So on November 3rd was the first time ESSER 3 was approved and talked about. On November 5th, the school board training session, there was discussion of capital projects and possible repurposing of AILR that was discussed at that meeting. February 3rd at Finance, I updated on the CARES funding for ESSER 3 and talked about using the former old AILR. On February 22nd, Buildings and Grounds, Mr. Bach reported it's not physically feasible to repurpose the former AILR for the use of a high school academy. And then on April 26th, it was determined that the old AILR would be surplus, and then we would move to our second in line project, which was an ARML Elementary School HVAC replacement. So during this time, even though those are dates, what we have to remember, we're going to talk about that in just a second, is the whole communication with the state that has to go along with these ESSER funds. So I'll draw your attention now to page number 35 in your handout. It's always important to have facts in front of you and be transparent. So we were notified as a school division on April 2021, notified that the funds were coming. That grant amount was $10.8 million, and it covered expenses between March of 2020 and September 2024. If you jump down to allowable uses, it must address the impact of COVID-19, learning loss. It's also for repairs and improvements of the operation of schools to reduce the risk of virus transmission. And you see the last bullet where it talks about how it's for mechanical, mechanical indoor air quality, upgrade to air conditioning system purification and such. So the overview at the bottom is where I think it's important to get the facts. These are one-time funds that we use for one-time expenditures. The grant requires no less than 20% for learning loss. That's a requirement of the grant. In our application, we currently have about 33% of it going to learning loss. Remember, these funds can be spent through September 2024, so it's not just a next year expenditure. The grant required the public to have at least 30 days to provide input on the spending plan. So what we did is on our website, we asked for comments. We talked about the money that we were getting for ESSER 3, and we were seeking comments on how to spend those funds. That sat out on our website. The requirement was 30 days. We set it out there for 60 days to receive comments. Those comments then were taken into account as we prepared the plan. The next bullet on the back of the page, the grant required us to post the spending plan that you will see on page 37 in your handout for 30 days, in which case we left it out there for the 30 days. If you look at that spending plan that's attached on the back sheet, the first paragraph, full paragraph, talks about using 7.2 for ALA. So that was for the public. It never scrolled on our website. It was required to stay stationary on the website. The link was there. All you had to do was click it, and then you could read the spending plan on how we had determined to use it. Again, the funds, we have to 2024 to spend these funds. That spending plan was both in English and Spanish and ADA accessible. We received comments on that and took those into account. But quite frankly, there was nothing that wasn't already included that we didn't receive comments on. The grant requires Virginia Department of Education to approve all capital expenditures relating to the grant. So when we first came out with ESSER 3, we talked about ALER. That went in July to VDOE. It takes them a while to turn things around for us to get their approval, in which case they did, and that's what we were working toward. With the understanding that if something changed, we would change the application and re-seek approval. That did happen about March. We were suspecting that ALER was not going to happen. So the application for that capital expenditure for Arnold for the HVAC replacement was sent to the state. On April the 4th, we received approval to now move those ESSER 3 to Arnold.
Just a month ago.
Just a month ago, yes. So now we're at that point where the other requirements are really saying that you can't mess with the maintenance of equity, and you see that there. Any formula, any of the ESSER 3 can't reduce per pupil at risk schools, which we made sure we were meeting. So there are criteria for ESSER 3 that are different than some of the other COVID-related money. So we thought maybe giving you an overview of the whole grant detail may help you understand the process that was followed and the timeline based on what was given to you from pages 35, 36, and then certainly all the resolutions and the minutes from all of the board meetings. And I'm just going to pause for a second if you have any questions at this point about the ESSER 3. I know it's a lot of information. And quite frankly, I wish Mr. McCarthy had asked for all the information and we could have laid it out for him a little better than the 7 questions. I think there's definitely some confusion about the funding. It's like we hid the money and we went down for supplemental appropriations, so we can't really say we hid the money because we went down last year for that. So that's
Our
fine.
finance meetings are open, so he could have attended.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, not really a question, but I think it would be helpful to elaborate offset local expenses. And I think it's our understanding, based upon federal guidelines and those two bullet points there, that isn't the case. So could you elaborate more on maintenance of equity and the fact that local dollars shouldn't be, or ESSER dollars should not be used to offset a reduction in local dollars?
Yeah, I think that whole issue really in a nutshell just says you're getting federal dollars, so therefore the county can't pull back on the local piece to help say, well, you're getting 7 million, so we don't have to give you 7 million more. This is really for those of us at risk schools that we have to make sure we're meeting, that it's being spent accordingly. That's where I get a little confused with, it's hard for us to know where people are thinking when they don't know what we know, you know? And so for Mr. McCarthy, when he said we could use it for other things, well, yeah, we could take ARML out and put the other projects from the capital projects fund that meet the doors and windows or any other HVAC replacement. But the whole point is still, we had a plan in place, and the plan was to go after ARML full force because that's a large ticket item. And then so that was at the earlier of the year. Then in February, we're looking at a capital projects list that's outside of the ARML project because we've already earmarked that too for ESSER 3. So that's what I'm.
Right, and just further, for instance, if we have two budgets, or two school buses in our budget, it's my understanding it's not allowable in ESSER 3 to take those buses out of the budget and then use ESSER funding to then refund buses under ESSER. Same thing for teaching positions, et cetera.
Got it. So you're talking about supplanting, basically.
Correct.
Well, in reality, ESSER 3 does not have supplanting. It does, because when they opened up ESSER 3, they were trying to say, push it out and do what you need to do, but you still got to follow the per pupil. So we could have said, we're taking these two buses, we're not going to use the local dollars for that, we're going to push it in ESSER 3, as long as we're still meeting the per pupil piece and not bringing that down. But you can supplant in this ESSER. That's what makes it so complicated.
But 1 and 2 you couldn't?
Actually, 1 you could, and 2, I think 2 you could too. I think supplanting didn't kick in because of the emergency of these funds and the purpose of the funds to get things moving. Does that help?
No, I think we're
Now,
on the
Title
same
I,
page.
definitely Title VI, yes, there's supplanting all over the place on those federal funds.
So Mrs. Cameron, given that, if you call it a discussion last Wednesday,
Was it just?
what, were they trying to redirect the funds, in your opinion, appropriately? Or was it just totally out there in left field as it appeared?
I'll give you my personal opinion. I feel like the school board has a plan, and we follow that plan. Through your school board meetings, through your finance meetings, through your buildings and grounds meetings. So I find it difficult to think that Mr. McCarthy, because he doesn't attend those meetings, to know what the plan is. And so when he's down there in a 10-minute conversation trying to redirect the funds that you all have decided and we've moved forward with, I think that's what is a little perplexing to me, I guess. I'll just put it like that. So for him to come up and say, well, you guys need to do this, or you're hiding money, that is far from, you can look at the minutes of all the meetings that were out there, the spending plan that was out there on our website, so there's plenty of places to find this. And communication went out to staff as well as to comment on how to use ESSER 3. So we were seeking public comment, and so I'm a little perplexed why the timing isn't what he's saying. He's acting like this money's just coming forward now, and we're just letting him know now, and that's not true. We knew it back early in 2021.
Okay, can I?
Communication went out to PTOs and advisory committees as well, so CTE advisory committee, special ed advisory committee, gifted advisory committee, specific communication seeking input on these.
So, can I ask you a question? We have the county down there with whatever all that is. So, we send the supervisors a quarterly report, and so we all have that. But, like say, the scenario you just went through, does either Cheryl Schiffler or Ms. McCann Slaughter, Chief of the Finance Committee there, do they know this?
I believe in the finance, when we would have gone down for the supplemental appropriation, it would have stated what we were using those funds for. At that time, it was still Ayler, I believe, was on there. So we got the supplemental appropriation, it was for learning loss and for the Ayler project. So that would have been in their packet that goes then to the full board for them to vote on, just as similar as what you all do. So she would have known that, and I think that's why she made the comment. She knew it was for an HVAC system, she just wasn't sure where. And that's probably because she called and questioned, and I said.
You're talking about she is Ms.
Ms. McCann
McCann Slaughter?
Slaughter, yeah, that it could easily have happened that she called and questioned the Ayler, and my point was to say if Ayler isn't a go, then we have ARMO, which is in the background, to come up. But she could also, because we went down for supplemental appropriation for ESSER 2, and that was the dehumidification at ARMO and Middletown that you all agreed upon. So, and then there's also the CSL FRF funds that is all for Cincinnati Road HVAC replacement, because we went down for supplemental appropriation for that as well. So you see there's a lot of things going on, and it's not a very narrow topic. This is a very broad thing that's happening that you all are very, up to date on, whereas I don't think the Board of Supervisors are. And I guess that's the whole thing, is saying we're hiding money.
Well, but the thing is that the implication, what's trying to be put out there is that we don't tell them.
Right.
And so, again, are we in touch with either Mr. Bohofer, Mr. DeHaven, Mrs. McCann Slaughter, Mrs. Schiffler? Do those people know?
Yeah, the memo goes down that asks us to be put on the agenda and why we want to be on the agenda. And then the memo always states what we're looking for, the amount and what our intent is, so that it helps them understand. So it always runs through finance and then goes to the full board to approve. So any supplemental appropriation is approved by the full board, Board of Supervisors.
I just find it interesting, because I mean, we've been dealing with these last minute questions throughout this whole process. And now Ayler's popping up the morning after our Building and Grounds Committee meeting. And it's almost like, he's got half the information and should have been at the meeting. So it's so baffling that these particular questions came up, specifically after the Board Building and Grounds Committee meeting.
Well, and the other thing to remember is, when Mr. McCarthy may be looking at the timeline, Mr. Bach did report that last week, last week, but we knew prior to the Buildings and Grounds that it wasn't a go, so that's why the application was already sent to the state to go ahead and get pre-approval so that we can move forward on ARMO. Now, nothing's happened on ARMO because we need the appropriation for next year, because that's when the timing will start with going out to bid for that.
And all the additional meetings that we've already gone through, and the postings and things like that, that the information's been there.
Yes.
So,
In my mind, it has.
yes, ma'am.
And who again sits on the committee for the building and grounds?
That is
Mr. Atkins.
And then last year for the finance committee, do we remember who
it
sat
was
on?
Mr. Lake, myself, and Mr. Mull.
So, my question too is, it's hard for me to understand how our chairman has sat on these committees and has all of this information and is somehow not able to convey the answers to the questions. Do you have any
Question for
clarification
me?
for that?
I've shared the answer to the questions. Their understanding of those answers is not, I can't control an individual's understanding of the answers. I mean, ARML is one project. We have a whole, as Ms. Camry and I talked last week, there's a whole list of projects. I mean, you could take out ARML as HVAC and it's page 18 or 15 of our capital improvements plan. So to insinuate that answers haven't been provided, I think is disingenuous. I think to Mr. Lake's point, there may, as there was a communication for a supplemental appropriation of Ayler of 7 point whatever, it's unfortunate that, they're not watching or attending these meetings, but to say that it hasn't been communicated with them, that I think is just.
Monk, 5 of us stood there in front of them, and they want to get the answers from you, so we just need to make sure you're clear on the information so you can pass it along, because we could have had this cleared up last week at the Board of Supervisors meeting.
I think it was cleared up based upon the information that's shared here, and then you would share again this week. I don't know any new information that they'll receive this Wednesday.
Well,
Yes.
please pass it along.
So you're happy to, feel free to communicate.
No, they won't talk to us. I mean,
I'm
we said,
encouraging you and others to communicate with them and doing the same with.
I've been giving correspondence, that all correspondence goes through you, so I just wanna make sure everything's clear, so you can pass it along.
And, just so I can add this, one thing so I can make sure, when that memo goes down to Mrs. Schiffler and the county administrator to get on the agenda, and Ms. McCann's father and everyone sees that memo is also in the board packet when they're approving at the Board of Supervisors. It's always included in the packet as their paperwork. So as you get a packet for your school board, that memo has always been in the Board of Supervisors. So all of them would see the same memo that Mrs. Schiffler is getting, that the county administrator is getting. It's the backup for the request. So it's always in all the full board's packet. I'll move to the next section if we're ready.
The salary clarification. Or, no, Esther.
Yeah, this was one of those things where I don't know if Dr. Savine, myself, and Mrs. Anderson, the rest of us were like shaking our head like, what the heck is he talking about? So I kind of felt like it was maybe important to talk about this because it was a little way off base. I should say a little bit off base. It was way off base. But Mr. Ludwig had made the comment that school administration used the special education teacher differential to pay for the administrators, or the administration received a 5% salary increase instead of a 3%. So you see the answer down below there. The administrative pay increase was never 3%. Instead, it was reduced to 4.5 along with the reduction in the pay differential. Remember, from the 7,000 down to the 6,000, and then the instructional assistants from 35 down to 3, I believe, in order to get the 3 additional CTE teachers that Mr. Monk had requested. So where 3% came from, I'm not sure. So it was always coming down to 4.5. But that cost of receiving the 5% increase instead of a 4.5 was $76,000. The cost of the pay differential mentioned above for those positions is 1.8. So if Mr. Ludwig knows how to invest money, that we could take $76,000 and make it 1.8, let's all jump on board, okay? So there's no way those two are tied together. The increase for administration has absolutely nothing to do with trying to pay for the differential. And that number does include benefits. Any question on that?
Just that in the blanket statement that they made that special ed would not receive a raise, that was.
Well, look at you, Mr. Blake, jumping on the next question there. There it is. So we also said special education teachers would not receive a raise because we took that differential away from them. Well, that's not true at all, no way, shape, or form. What was in the budget and what has been in the budget now is still 5% across the board for everyone, including special ed teachers. And that would still be true if the Board of Supervisors approve scenario A or if they approve scenario C. 5% is still in those scenarios. Now, they could change and come up with a new scenario, which I hope not, unless it's better, which I doubt. So 5% has always been in there for teachers, period. So the differential has nothing to do with special ed teachers losing the 5%, because that's over and beyond the 5%. Are we good on that one?
It's pretty cut and dry.
So as we're sitting here talking, I thought about turning this question over to Mrs. Anderson. I thought, you know what, you guys never get to hear anything good from me, so I'm going to keep on with the good question to say. Mrs. Anderson, thank you for letting me address this question.
Serious.
I am going to let her do this one because, you know.
Well, as you can see on the screen, we have some good news to share. I believe it was you, Mr. Comstock, who brought up a few finance committee meetings ago that it would be great if this is something that we could pass on to our employees. And after talking with our insurance carrier and our plan administrator, based on our utilization trends, we can, or we do not have to pass on that 5% increase to our employees.
So with that, it also, we did not change anything with the plan, so we didn't cut any benefits. Or anything from that. I know what you're thinking, Mr. Comstock, so I'm just gonna jump on that before you have the chance.
I'm looking through that one.
Yeah, so it's the same plan, it's the same thing that we had this year, the current year, but we're gonna be able to absorb that $200-some-thousand. So we're thrilled to be able to bring that back to you all. And with that, Mr. Hester, that is the end of our report.
Thank you, Ms. Cameron. Do we have any further questions, discussion? I again want to thank you, Mrs. Cammery, Mrs. Anderson, Finance Department, for putting all this nonsense together, because it is nonsense. In all due respect, I don't know how you do it, so I appreciate you all. And with that said, there's no other questions. Do you have any, Mr. Comstock? Make sure your questions are
Mr. Chair,
yes, sir.
just for the benefit of Finance Committee members and other board members that may be in attendance, just want to share with you that before I left the office Friday, I worked with our finance team to complete a very brief video that will be posted on our website following this meeting, which will provide information regarding the issue that was discussed in this meeting regarding ESSER 3 vote.
That's a great idea, Dr. Sabine, and thank you for doing that. Do you have any questions, Mr. Monk?
I don't, appreciate it.
Mrs. White?
Yeah, unless Mr. Monk has any insight to any potential questions that might be coming up. You are the only person that.
I wish I did, to be candid, I don't understand the rationale for Wednesday's meeting, so, that rationale is, because I feel like all the answers are correct.
So, Mr. Monk, your reaction to Wednesday's meeting?
Pissed off, to be frank. I hope we have a budget after that, and still unsure as to why we don't have a budget.
But do you understand the way it looked? They were willing to suspend rules. They did it at 11 o'clock to extend the meeting. And with 5 people standing 10 feet from the microphone that had the answers, Mr. McCarthy was willing to suspend the rules if he could hear from you, but not those 5 people. Do you understand how that looks? What in the world was that about?
Your guess is as good as mine. I talked to Mr. McCarthy via phone and in response to these questions. I don't quite understand why I'm now being asked to come in addition to Ms. Camry and Dr. Sabine.
Are you going to be there?
I have canceled a trip to New Mexico.
Thank God.
It was 10 years on this board. I've never seen anything like it. I just never seen anything like that. This committee, we are the finance committee. The 7-member board, totally embarrassed in that meeting. I've never seen anything like it. It's infuriating. You stopped the meeting because you were the only one that could answer this question. It's infuriating.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, so I think the point we're trying to make is, what is the answer that you have that we don't have?
For an attempt not to be redundant, I've shared every bit of information I could possibly share. So I don't know what more I can share with you, because I don't know what question it is there. We're sharing information about ESSER. I provided you, I know it's not included in this packet, but all of our school board members, those same questions and answers the same day. I don't know what question it is that you're asking that I have some magical answer to.
It's not us, it's Mr. McCarthy. He's the one who has the golden question that only you have the answer to. The superintendent was right there. Wouldn't call on, wanted you. That's what it looked like.
We'll have a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
All those in favor?